The moment my 7-year-old daughter Emma adjusted her bright purple hearing aid and smiled at my sister Jessica across the dinner table. I should have known what was coming. Jessica had always been cruel, but I never imagined she would target a child. When she pointed at Emma's ear and said, "What's that ugly thing? It makes you look like a robot?" The entire room went silent. Dad chuckled and said, "It's just a joke, lighten up." I froze, but my wife Sarah didn't. I need to take you back 2 years to when Emma was 5 and our world changed forever. Sarah and I first noticed something was wrong during a family barbecue at my parents' house in suburban Denver. Emma kept asking us to repeat ourselves, and she seemed confused when other children called her name from across the yard. The pediatrician initially dismissed our concerns, suggesting Emma was simply being selective with her attention. But Sarah, being the thorough person she is, insisted on a hearing specialist. Dr. Martinez at Children's Hospital Colorado ran comprehensive tests that revealed Emma had moderate sensorineural hearing loss in both ears. The diagnosis hit us like a freight train. Sarah cried for hours that night, not from shame, but from worry about the challenges Emma would face. The hearing aid fitting process took weeks. Emma was incredibly brave sitting still while the audiologist made molds of her ears and explained how the devices would help her hear better. She chose purple because it was her favorite color and she wanted everyone to see them. "I want people to know I'm special," she told us with such confidence that both Sarah and I teared up. What we didn't expect was how the family would react. My mother Carol made sympathetic noises but kept suggesting we get second opinions and try natural remedies. My father Robert, who built his construction empire from nothing, seemed frustrated by anything that wasn't fixable with hard work and determination. But Jessica's reaction was the most troubling. During our first family dinner after Emma got her hearing aids, Jessica kept staring at them and making comments about how different Emma looked. She suggested we sit Emma at the children's table in the kitchen instead of the main dining room because she might not follow conversations anyway. Sarah politely but firmly declined, explaining that Emma needed to be included, not isolated. I should have paid closer attention to Jessica's behavior that night. She kept taking photos during dinner, claiming she wanted to capture family memories. Emma posed happily proud of her new purple hearing aids and excited to be part of adult conversations she could finally follow completely. The months following Emma's diagnosis revealed something beautiful about my daughter's character. Instead of hiding her hearing aids, she embraced them. She educated her classmates about hearing loss, helped her teacher arrange seating so sound carried better, and even volunteered to speak at school assemblies about differences and acceptance. Sarah threw herself into advocacy work, joining parent support groups, and learning everything possible about childhood hearing loss. She connected with other families, attended workshops, and became Emma's fiercest champion. Watching Sarah advocate for our daughter filled me with admiration and love. But I struggled with my own demons during this time. When I was Emma's age, I had hearing problems too. My parents took me to specialists who recommended hearing aids, but Robert refused, insisting I just needed to pay better attention and stop being lazy. The problems eventually resolved on their own, but I spent years straining to hear, falling behind in school, and feeling isolated from other children. I never told Sarah about my childhood hearing issues. Part of me worried that knowing about my genetic contribution to Emma's condition would burden her with unnecessary guilt. But deeper down, I feared confronting the painful memories of feeling defective and unwanted in my own family. Jessica had always been Robert's favorite child. She was outgoing, athletic, and seemed to effortlessly meet every expectation our parents set. While I struggled academically and socially, Jessica excelled at everything from cheerleading to student government. Robert proudly displayed her achievements throughout the house, while my accomplishments gathered dust in boxes. As adults, this dynamic continued. Robert frequently praised Jessica's career in real estate, her ambitious social life, and her ability to handle anything life throws at her. Meanwhile, my steady job as a software engineer for a nonprofit organization seemed to bore him. He rarely asked about my work or showed interest in my family's daily life. But tonight felt different. The tension in the room was thicker than usual, and Jessica seemed particularly agitated. She kept checking her phone during dinner and making snide remarks about people who make everything about their problems. When Emma proudly explained how her new hearing aid settings helped her hear different frequencies, Jessica rolled her eyes and muttered something about attention-seeking. That's when Sarah checked her own phone and her face went completely white. She stared at the screen for several long moments before looking up at Jessica with an expression I'd never seen before. It was pure, controlled fury. "Jessica," Sarah said in a voice so calm it was terrifying, "we need to talk about the videos you've been posting." Jessica's fork clattered against her plate and the color drained from her face. "What videos?" she stammered. But her guilty expression betrayed her immediately. Sarah held up her phone showing a social media post with over 3,000 views. The video showed Emma struggling to adjust her hearing aid during Thanksgiving dinner with the caption, "When your niece thinks she's getting special treatment, some people will do anything for attention, LOL." The silence that followed felt like a physical weight pressing down on all of us. Emma looked confused, glancing between Sarah and Jessica with wide, innocent eyes. Carol gasped and covered her mouth with her hands. Robert leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Delete them," Sarah said, her voice steady but laced with steel. "Delete them all, right now." Jessica's defensive walls went up immediately. "They're just family videos. It's not illegal to share memories of family gatherings. People share funny family moments all the time." "Funny?" Sarah's voice rose slightly. "You think mocking a child with a disability is funny? You think turning Emma's challenges into entertainment for strangers is acceptable?" I found myself paralyzed, caught between my loyalty to my daughter and my lifelong pattern of avoiding conflict with my family. Part of me wanted to support Sarah completely, but another part feared the explosive confrontation that was clearly coming. Robert finally spoke up, and his words cut through me like a knife. "Sarah, you're overreacting. Jessica wasn't being malicious. She's just sharing family life like everyone else does on social media these days. You're being too sensitive about this." "Too sensitive," Sarah repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. "About someone exploiting my daughter's disability for social media, likes about turning Emma into a joke for strangers to laugh at." Jessica found her courage and launched into a defensive tirade. "Emma's always performing for attention anyway. She makes such a big deal about those hearing aids, constantly adjusting them and talking about them. She acts like she's the most special person in the room. I'm just documenting real family life." The cruelty in Jessica's words hit me like a physical blow. Emma wasn't performing or seeking attention. She was a 7-year-old child, learning to navigate the world with a hearing disability, and she did it with remarkable grace and courage. Carol finally spoke, her voice shaky with emotion. "Maybe we could all just calm down and discuss this reasonably. Perhaps Jessica could adjust her privacy settings so fewer people see the videos." "No," Sarah said firmly. "The videos need to be deleted completely. This isn't about privacy settings. This is about basic human decency and respect for a child who cannot consent to being mocked publicly." Jessica's phone rang and she glanced at the caller ID before answering. It was clearly one of our cousins, probably calling about the growing online drama. During the brief conversation, Jessica's confidence seemed to build. She hung up and looked directly at Sarah with newfound defiance. "Actually, I'm not deleting anything," Jessica announced. "These are my posts on my personal account. I have freedom of speech and I can share whatever family memories I want. If you don't like it, maybe you should consider whether Emma really belongs at family gatherings if she's going to cause so much drama." The words hung in the air like poison gas. Even Robert looked uncomfortable with Jessica's boldness, though he didn't correct her. Carol stared down at her plate, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. Emma, who had been listening with growing confusion, finally spoke up in her small, clear voice. "Did I do something wrong? Are you mad at me because of my purple ears?" Sarah's expression transformed from anger to fierce, maternal protection. She knelt beside Emma's chair and spoke directly to her. "You did absolutely nothing wrong, sweetheart. Your purple ears are perfect, and you are perfect exactly as you are. Some grown-ups forget how to be kind, but that's not your fault." Then Sarah stood and faced Jessica with devastating calm. "You want to know what real family looks like? Real family protects children. Real family celebrates differences instead of mocking them. Real family lifts each other up instead of tearing each other down for entertainment." Jessica's phone buzzed with notifications, and she glanced at it smugly. Looks like people are enjoying the content. Maybe Emma will learn that the world doesn't revolve around her special needs. That's when I finally found my voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Jessica, stop. Please. She's just a little girl." "A little girl who gets constant special treatment." Jessica exploded. "Do you know how exhausting it is to attend family events where everything has to be adjusted for Emma's needs? We have to speak louder, repeat ourselves, make sure she can see everyone's faces. It's like her disability controls the entire family." Robert nodded in agreement, and my heart shattered completely. Jessica has a point, Emile. Emma requires a lot of accommodations that change the dynamic for everyone else. Maybe it would be easier if she stayed home sometimes. The phone calls started coming in rapid succession. Aunts, uncles, and cousins who had seen Jessica's videos were choosing sides. Some supported Jessica's right to free expression, while others expressed concern about Emma's privacy and dignity. But then my cousin David called, and his conversation with Jessica took an unexpected turn. He wasn't calling to gossip or take sides. He was calling because his wife, who worked in civil rights law, had seen the videos and wanted to warn Jessica about potential legal consequences. Jessica's confidence began to waver as David explained that publicly mocking a disabled child could constitute harassment under disability rights laws. But instead of backing down, Jessica doubled down on her position. "I'm not harassing anyone, I'm documenting my own family experiences. If Emma's disability makes people uncomfortable, maybe that's something Emile and Sarah need to address instead of blaming everyone else." The room fell silent again, and I realized we had reached a point of no return. Jessica wasn't going to apologize or change course. Robert was supporting her completely. Carol was remaining passive as always. And my daughter was sitting in the middle of it, all trying to understand why her family was angry about her purple ears. That's when Jessica delivered her final devastating blow. She looked directly at Emma and said, "Maybe when you're older, you'll understand that not everyone needs to make such a big deal about being different. Some people just handle their problems quietly, instead of making everyone else accommodate them." Sarah stood up so abruptly that her chair fell backward. The crash echoed through the dining room like a gunshot, but instead of shouting or arguing further, she spoke with the kind of calm authority that comes from absolute moral certainty. "We're leaving. Now. Emma, get your jacket, sweetheart. We're going home." But before we could gather our things and leave, Robert raised his hand, like he was calling a business meeting to order. "Nobody's going anywhere until we settle this properly," he announced, with the same commanding voice he used on construction sites. "Jessica, bring me that folder from the kitchen counter." My stomach dropped as Jessica retrieved a manila folder and placed it in front of Robert with an expression of smug satisfaction. This had been planned. Whatever was about to happen, they had orchestrated it in advance. Robert opened the folder and pulled out several typed documents. "Emile, I've been meaning to discuss some family business matters with you, and tonight seems like the perfect time, especially given the current situation." Sarah remained standing, her protective stance unwavering as she kept one hand on Emma's shoulder. What kind of family business requires ambushing people during dinner? Robert ignored Sarah's question and addressed me directly. Emile, you know that the construction company has been in our family for 37 years. Your grandfather started it. I built it into what it is today, and eventually it will need to pass to the next generation. I felt a chill of dread as Robert's words sank in. Jessica leaned forward eagerly, clearly knowing what was coming next. Carol continued staring at her plate, her silence speaking volumes about her complicity in whatever scheme they had hatched. Over the past year, Jessica and I have been working with family lawyers to create what we're calling a family heritage charter. Robert continued his voice, taking on the tone he used when delivering ultimatums to subcontractors. It's designed to protect the family business and ensure that our legacy continues through future generations who can maintain our standards. He slid the first document across the table toward me. The official letterhead and legal language made my hands shake as I tried to read the dense text. Sarah moved behind me to read over my shoulder, and I felt her body tense as she processed the implications. The charter establishes guidelines for family participation in business operations and inheritance considerations, Robert explained with clinical detachment. It takes into account various factors that might affect an individual's ability to contribute meaningfully to the family enterprise. The blood drained from my face as I read section after section of legal language that essentially codified discrimination against family members with disabilities or genetic conditions. The document referenced hereditary health issues, dependency requirements, and accommodation costs that could impact business efficiency and family resources. Jessica couldn't contain her excitement any longer. It's actually quite progressive, Emile. We're being proactive about protecting the family's financial future by ensuring that resources go to family members who can contribute rather than those who will just be a drain on everyone else. A drain. Sarah's voice was deadly quiet. Are you referring to our daughter as a drain on family resources? Robert pulled out another document, this one with Emma's name prominently displayed at the top. We've had geneticists review the family medical history, and Emma's condition indicates potential ongoing health expenses and educational accommodations that could impact family finances for decades. The room started spinning as the full scope of their plan became clear. They hadn't just been making cruel jokes about Emma's hearing aids. They had been systematically documenting her condition, consulting with lawyers and medical professionals, and building a legal case to exclude her from any future family inheritance or business participation. The charter requires family members to acknowledge genetic health issues and agree to certain limitations on their participation in family business decisions, Robert continued. It also includes provisions for voluntary withdrawal from inheritance considerations in exchange for immediate modest compensation. Sarah grabbed the documents from my hands and began reading aloud. Family members with documented genetic conditions that require ongoing accommodation or present inheritance risks to future generations may elect to receive immediate settlement payments in lieu of future business participation or estate distribution. Her voice rose with each word. You're trying to buy us out because our daughter has a disability. Jessica leaned back in her chair with satisfaction. We're offering you a fair deal, Emile. Take the settlement money now, and you won't have to worry about family obligations anymore. Emma won't have to attend family events where she might feel uncomfortable, and the rest of us can maintain our normal family traditions. The calculating cruelty of their plan was breathtaking. They had used Emma's disability as the excuse to systematically exclude us from the family, while making it sound like they were doing us a favor. Every family gathering, every comment about accommodations, every reference to Emma's needs had been building toward this moment. Carol finally looked up from her plate and spoke in a trembling voice. Maybe it would be easier for everyone if we could just find a solution that works for all parties involved. Easier for who, Mom? I asked, finding my voice for the first time since Robert had started his presentation. Easier for you to exclude your granddaughter. Easier for you to pretend she doesn't exist. Robert's patience was clearly wearing thin. Emil, this isn't personal. This is business. The construction industry is highly competitive, and we can't afford to have our decision-making process complicated by emotional considerations or special accommodation requirements. Emotional considerations? Sarah repeated incredulously. You mean loving our daughter, wanting her to be included in her own family? Those are emotional considerations that complicate your business. Jessica pulled out her phone and showed us more social media posts. Look at the comments on the videos, Emil. People are saying Emma seems sweet, but that parents like you two are exhausting to deal with. They're tired of having to accommodate special needs children at every social gathering. The comments were a mixture of support and cruelty, but Jessica had clearly curated the negative responses to support her argument. Some people defended Emma and criticized Jessica's behavior, but others made horrible jokes about disabled children or complained about entitled parents who expected accommodations. This is what you'll face for the rest of Emma's life, Jessica continued. Constant battles, constant explanations, constant demands for people to change their behavior to accommodate her needs. Wouldn't it be better to just accept the settlement and start fresh somewhere else? Robert placed the final document on the table. It was a settlement agreement offering us $50,000 in exchange for permanently relinquishing any claims to family business participation inheritance rights or future family property distributions. The amount was simultaneously generous enough to seem reasonable and insulting enough to communicate our low value in their estimation. You have 48 hours to consider the offer, Robert announced. After that, the charter goes into effect with or without your agreement, and the settlement opportunity expires. Sarah looked at me with an expression that mixed heartbreak with determination. She was waiting to see whether I would finally stand up to my family or continue the pattern of passive acceptance that had defined my entire relationship with them. Emma, who had been quietly listening to the adults discuss her future like she was a business problem to be solved, finally spoke up in her clear, brave voice. Daddy or Grandpa and Aunt Jessica mad at me because I can't hear good without my purple ears. The innocent question shattered whatever remaining composure I had been clinging to. My 7-year-old daughter was trying to understand why her own family was treating her like a liability, and I realized that my silence was teaching her to accept their cruelty as normal. But before I could respond, Sarah made a decision that changed everything. She picked up her phone and, without saying a word, began recording video of the entire conversation. Robert's face turned red with fury as he realized what she was doing. "Turn that off immediately," he demanded. "This is a private family discussion, and you have no right to record confidential business conversations." Sarah smiled for the first time since the dinner began, and her expression was absolutely terrifying in its calm confidence. "Actually, Robert, I have every right to document threats and discriminatory behavior toward my daughter, especially when that behavior potentially violates federal disability rights laws." The silence that followed Sarah's announcement was deafening. Robert's face cycled through several shades of red as he processed the implications of what Sarah had just said. Jessica's smug expression faltered as she glanced nervously between her father and my wife. "Federal laws," Robert sputtered. "This is a private family matter. The government has no business interfering with how families manage their internal affairs." Sarah continued recording while speaking in the calm, professional voice I recognized from her advocacy work. "Robert, you've just described a systematic plan to exclude a disabled child from family inheritance and business participation based solely on her genetic condition. You've created legal documents designed to discriminate against family members with disabilities. And you've done all of this while that child is sitting at your dinner table. She turned the phone toward the Family Heritage Charter documents, capturing clear images of the discriminatory language, before Robert could snatch them away. These documents explicitly reference genetic health conditions as disqualifying factors for family business participation and inheritance rights. That constitutes disability discrimination under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Jessica jumped up from her chair, panic creeping into her voice. You can't record private conversations without permission. That's illegal. Actually, Sarah replied with deadly calm, Colorado is a one-party consent state for recording conversations, and I'm a party to this conversation. But more importantly, I'm a mother protecting her child from discriminatory threats, and I'm also a civil rights attorney who specializes in disability discrimination cases. The bombshell landed with devastating effect. Robert's mouth fell open, and Jessica went completely white. I stared at my wife in amazement, realizing that I had never asked her specifically what type of legal work she did in her advocacy role. That's right, Sarah continued, still recording. I've spent the past 5 years working with the Rocky Mountain Disability Law Center, specializing in cases involving discrimination against children with disabilities. I've successfully prosecuted dozens of cases involving everything from educational discrimination to employment violations to family inheritance disputes. She moved the camera to capture Robert's shocked expression and Jessica's growing panic. What you've described tonight constitutes a clear violation of federal civil rights laws. Creating legal documents designed to exclude disabled family members from inheritance based on their genetic conditions is textbook disability discrimination. Robert found his voice, but it was shaky with uncertainty. This is ridiculous. Families have the right to make their own decisions about property and business ownership. We're not discriminating against anyone. Really, Sarah zoomed in on specific sections of the charter documents. Let me read some exact quotes from your Family Heritage Charter. Section 4, subsection C, family members with documented genetic conditions that present ongoing accommodation costs or dependency requirements may be excluded from business participation at the discretion of senior family leadership. She continued reading while maintaining the recording. Section 7, subsection A, inheritance distributions may be reduced or eliminated for family members whose genetic health issues could impact future family financial stability or require ongoing special accommodations. Emma had been listening to the entire exchange with wide eyes, and she suddenly tugged on my sleeve. Daddy, what's genetic mean? Are they talking about my purple ears again? The innocent question in the middle of Sarah's legal demolition of my family's discriminatory plan was like a lightning strike of clarity. My daughter was asking for help understanding why her own family was treating her like a burden, and I realized that this moment would define how she saw herself for the rest of her life. I knelt down beside Emma's chair and spoke directly to her. Emma, genetic means the things about us that come from our parents and grandparents. Your purple ears help you hear better, and they're part of what makes you special and strong. Then I stood up and looked directly at Robert for the first time in my adult life with complete moral certainty. The answer is no. We're not signing your charter, we're not taking your settlement money, and we're not allowing you to exclude Emma from this family because she's different. Jessica's panic escalated into desperation. Emil, you're making a huge mistake. Sarah's just trying to manipulate you with legal threats. Family businesses have to make practical decisions about inheritance and leadership. But Sarah wasn't finished. She pulled up additional apps on her phone while continuing to record. I'm now uploading this video to secure cloud storage and sending copies to my colleagues at the Disability Law Center. I'm also filing an immediate complaint with the Colorado Civil Rights Division and the U.S. Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. Robert's construction business persona crumbled as he realized the potential consequences. Sarah, let's be reasonable here. Maybe we can modify the charter language to address your concerns. There's no need to involve outside authorities in private family discussions. Oh, but there is, Sarah replied with laser focus, because this isn't just about our family anymore. If you're willing to systematically discriminate against your own granddaughter, how many disabled employees in your construction company have faced similar treatment? How many families have you excluded from housing projects because they had disabled family members? The color drained completely from Robert's face as the scope of potential legal exposure became clear. Jessica started frantically trying to delete social media posts from her phone, but Sarah had already captured screenshots of everything. Carol finally found the courage to speak, her voice barely audible. Maybe we all need to take a step back and think about what's best for everyone involved. What's best for everyone, Sarah said firmly, is treating disabled children with dignity and respect instead of trying to exclude them from their own families. What's best for everyone is following federal civil rights laws instead of creating discriminatory legal documents. Emma raised her small hand like she was in school. Can I say something? I think my purple ears are pretty, and I like being part of our family. I don't want to take money to go away. The simple honesty of Emma's statement cut through all the legal and business arguments like a sword. Here was a 7-year-old child who understood the situation better than the adults who were supposed to protect her. Sarah knelt down beside Emma and spoke gently. You don't have to go anywhere, sweetheart. Your purple ears are beautiful. You're an important part of our family, and nobody has the right to exclude you because you're different. Then she stood and addressed Robert with final authority. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to destroy that discriminatory charter immediately. You're going to cease all attempts to exclude Emma from family activities or inheritance considerations. And you're going to publicly apologize for your discriminatory behavior. Robert tried one last desperate gambit, and if we refuse, you'll really take your own family to court over this. Sarah's smile was absolutely terrifying. Robert, I won't need to take you to court. The federal government will do that for me. Disability discrimination cases like this typically result in criminal charges, massive financial penalties, and federal oversight of business operations. Your construction company could face millions of dollars in fines and possible criminal prosecution. Jessica collapsed back into her chair, finally understanding the magnitude of what they had attempted. But we're family. You can't destroy the family business over this. We're not destroying anything, Sarah replied. You destroyed it the moment you decided to target a disabled child with discriminatory legal schemes. I'm just documenting the evidence and ensuring that appropriate authorities can protect other families from similar treatment. The room fell silent except for the sound of Sarah's phone continuing to record. Robert stared at the charter documents like they had transformed into venomous snakes. Carol covered her face with her hands. Jessica sat frozen with her own phone in her lap, realizing that her social media mockery had escalated into a federal civil rights case. Emma looked around at all the shocked adult faces and made an observation that demonstrated wisdom far beyond her 7 years. I think everyone's really upset. Maybe we should all go home and think about how to be nicer to each other. Sarah ended the recording and began packing up her things with efficient calm. Emma's absolutely right. We're going home now. Robert, you have 24 hours to destroy those documents and contact my office to discuss resolution of this matter. She handed Robert a business card that identified her as senior staff attorney at the Rocky Mountain Disability Law Center. My office will be filing formal complaints with multiple federal agencies regarding your discriminatory practices. I suggest you contact competent legal counsel immediately. As we prepared to leave, Jessica made one final desperate attempt to salvage the situation. Sarah, please don't do this. Can't we just pretend this conversation never happened? I'll delete the videos. Dad will get rid of the charter, and we can go back to normal family dinners. Sarah paused at the door and looked back at Jessica with something that might have been pity. Normal Jessica targeting disabled children was never normal. Creating legal documents to exclude family members based on genetic conditions was never normal. The only thing that's going to be normal from now on is treating Emma with the respect and dignity she deserves. She took Emma's hand and smiled down at her. "Ready to go home, sweetheart?" Emma nodded and waved goodbye to her grandparents and aunt with the same cheerful innocence she had shown when we arrived. "Bye, everyone. I hope you feel better soon." As we walked to our car, I realized that my wife had just accomplished something I had never been able to do in 32 years. She had stood up to my family's bullying behavior and protected our daughter with courage, intelligence, and unwavering moral certainty. But I also realized that the real battle was just beginning. I woke up the next morning to the sound of Sarah's phone buzzing incessantly with notifications. Emma was still asleep between us having crawled into our bed during the night after experiencing what she called worry dreams about the family dinner. Sarah checked her phone and her eyes went wide with amazement. "Emile, you need to see this," she whispered, careful not to wake Emma. "The video I posted to the Disability Advocacy Network has been shared over 12,000 times in the past 8 hours. I rubbed my eyes and looked at the screen as Sarah scrolled through hundreds of comments from parents, disability advocates, legal professionals, and complete strangers who had been touched by Emma's story. The overwhelming response was supportive, with people sharing their own experiences of family discrimination and offering resources for fighting back. But what shocked me most was the secondary wave of sharing that had occurred. Parents of children with various disabilities had reshared the video with their own stories of exclusion, discrimination, and family rejection. Teachers had shared it with commentary about the importance of inclusion in educational settings. Even celebrities and public figures had begun commenting on the post, turning our family crisis into a national conversation about disability rights. Sarah showed me a message from her supervisor at the Rocky Mountain Disability Law Center. "Emile, look at this. The Department of Justice Civil Rights Division wants to interview me this morning about potentially expanding their investigation beyond just Robert's construction company." My phone started ringing before I could fully process what Sarah had said. The caller ID showed my cousin David, who had called Jessica the night before to warn her about legal consequences. "Emile, thank God you answered," David said without preamble. "I've been trying to reach Uncle Robert all night, but his phone goes straight to voicemail. Please tell me this video circulating online isn't from last night's dinner." I looked at Sarah, who nodded for me to tell the truth. "It's real, David. Everything in that video actually happened exactly as shown." The silence on the other end lasted so long that I thought the call had dropped. Finally, David spoke in a voice filled with horror and disbelief. "Emile, do you understand what this means? Uncle Robert's construction company has federal contracts. They built the new Veterans Affairs Medical Center last year. If the government finds evidence of disability discrimination in his business practices, they could face criminal prosecution and lose every government contract." That's when it hit me. Robert's construction company had been built largely on government contracts for public buildings, schools, and medical facilities. If federal investigators found evidence that he had been discriminating against disabled employees or excluding disabled people from housing projects, the legal and financial consequences would be devastating. Sarah was already ahead of me reading news articles that had started appearing online. "Emile, the Denver Post has picked up the story. Channel 7 wants to interview us this afternoon. The Colorado Disability Coalition is planning a protest outside Robert's construction company offices." Emma stirred between us and opened her sleepy eyes. "Good morning, Mommy and Daddy. Are people still talking about my purple ears?" Sarah gathered Emma into a hug and spoke gently. "Some people are talking about your purple ears, sweetheart, but they're saying nice things. They think you're very brave and special." Emma brightened immediately. "Can I see the nice things people said?" Sarah showed Emma some of the gentler comments from parents of other children with hearing aids. One mother had posted a photo of her own daughter's bright blue hearing aids, with a message about how Emma's courage inspired their family. Another parent shared a video of their son proudly showing off his green hearing aids at school. Look, Emma." Sarah pointed to a comment thread. "This little boy says he wants purple hearing aids just like yours because they look so pretty. Emma giggled with delight. Maybe we can be purple ear friends? But my phone kept ringing with increasingly urgent calls. My Aunt Linda called to tell me that Robert had closed the construction company offices and wasn't returning calls from employees or clients. My Uncle Tom called to say that Jessica had deactivated all her social media accounts and was refusing to talk to anyone in the family. Then Carol called, and her voice was so shaky I could barely understand her. "Emil, please come over. Your father is in a terrible state, and I don't know what to do." There are news vans parked outside our house and the phone hasn't stopped ringing. Sarah and I exchanged glances over Emma's head. "Mom, what kind of calls are you getting?" "Reporters wanting statements about the family charter," Carol sobbed. "Lawyers asking about employment practices at the construction company, government officials demanding immediate meetings with your father. And Emil, there are other families calling too. People saying they've had similar experiences with your father's company." My stomach dropped as the implications became clear. The video hadn't just exposed my family's discriminatory behavior. It had apparently encouraged other victims to come forward with their own stories of discrimination by Robert's construction company. Sarah was already getting dressed and preparing Emma for the day. "Emil, I need to get to the office. The Justice Department investigators are flying in from Washington this afternoon, and I need to prepare comprehensive documentation of everything that happened." Emma looked up from choosing her outfit with characteristic 7-year-old practicality. "Daddy, are we going to see Grandpa and Grandma today? I want to show Grandpa that my purple ears can help me hear whispers." The innocent question broke my heart. Despite everything that had happened, Emma still loved her grandparents and wanted to repair the relationship. She didn't understand that Robert and Carol might never be able to accept her hearing aids or see past her disability. That's when Sarah's phone rang with a call that changed everything. The caller ID showed her boss at the Disability Law Center, and Sarah's expression grew increasingly serious as she listened. "Emil," she said after hanging up, "the preliminary investigation has already uncovered significant evidence of systemic discrimination. The federal investigators found employment records showing that Robert's company has never hired a single employee with any documented disability in 37 years of operation." She pulled up additional information on her phone. They also found housing project records indicating that families with disabled children were consistently excluded from Robert's residential developments through various screening mechanisms. The scope of Robert's discriminatory practices was apparently much larger than we had ever imagined. What had started as a family dinner confrontation about Emma's hearing aids had exposed decades of systematic discrimination affecting hundreds of families. But then Emma made an observation that reminded me why we were fighting this battle. "Mommy, if Grandpa's company doesn't hire people with purple ears or wheelchairs or other special things, how do those people get jobs?" Sarah knelt down to Emma's level and explained gently, "That's exactly why there are laws to protect people, sweetheart. Everyone deserves a chance to work and live wherever they want, no matter what makes them different." Emma nodded seriously. Maybe Grandpa just forgot that rule. Maybe someone should remind him. The phone rang again, and this time it was a number I didn't recognize. A woman's voice introduced herself as Maria Gonzalez from Channel 7 News, requesting an interview about our family's experience with disability discrimination. "Mr. Anderson, your daughter's story has resonated with families across the country. Would you be willing to share your experience publicly to help other families facing similar discrimination?" I looked at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. "Yes," I heard myself saying. "We'll do the interview. People need to know that this kind of discrimination is happening and that families have the right to fight back." As I hung up the phone, Emma tugged on my sleeve with a question that demonstrated her remarkable emotional intelligence. "Daddy, if we tell everyone about what happened, will Grandpa be embarrassed? I don't want him to feel bad." Her compassion for the man who had tried to exclude her from the family was both heartbreaking and inspiring. "Emma, sometimes when people make mistakes, they feel embarrassed when others find out." But talking about mistakes is how we help everyone learn to do better. Sarah received another call, this one from an attorney representing several former employees of Roberts Construction Company who had experienced disability discrimination. They wanted to join our case and expand it into a class action lawsuit. Emil, Sarah said quietly, this is becoming much bigger than just our family situation. We could be looking at one of the largest disability discrimination cases in Colorado history. Emma, who had been listening to our conversations with the focused attention that hearing-impaired children develop, made a statement that summarized everything perfectly. I think lots of people have been sad because other people weren't nice about their differences. Maybe if we're brave, we can help everyone feel better. That's when I realized that my 7-year-old daughter understood something about courage and justice that had taken me 32 years to learn. We weren't just fighting for Emma anymore. We were fighting for every disabled person who had been excluded, dismissed, or discriminated against by people like my father. The battle was just beginning, but for the first time in my life, I felt ready to fight. The interview with Channel 7 News took place in our living room that afternoon, with Emma sitting proudly between Sarah and me, her purple hearing aids gleaming in the television lights. The reporter Maria Gonzalez was gentle and professional, asking Emma simple questions about her hearing aids and how they made her feel. I like my purple ears because they help me hear everything, Emma explained with matter-of-fact confidence. Birds singing, music playing, and when mommy and daddy tell me they love me. I don't know why anyone would think they're ugly. The interview focused on our family's experience, but Maria also provided context about the broader investigation into Roberts Construction Company. Federal investigators had received over 40 complaints from former employees and subcontractors alleging systematic discrimination against disabled workers. When the news segment aired that evening, the response was overwhelming. Sarah's phone rang constantly with calls from other families sharing similar experiences, legal organizations offering support, and media outlets requesting follow-up interviews. But the most significant call came from Agent Jennifer Walsh of the FBI's Civil Rights Division. She wanted to meet with us. She wanted us the following morning to discuss the potential criminal aspects of Roberts' discriminatory practices. Mr. Anderson. Agent Walsh explained, when discrimination becomes systematic and involves federal contracts, it crosses the line from civil violations into criminal territory. Your father's company received over $15 million in federal funding for public projects while apparently maintaining policies that excluded disabled workers. Sarah spent that evening preparing a comprehensive timeline of Robert's discriminatory behavior, including the family charter documents, Jessica's social media posts, and every detail of the dinner confrontation. Her legal expertise proved invaluable as she organized evidence that would support both civil and criminal prosecutions. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Robert's largest client, the Colorado Department of Transportation, announced the immediate suspension of all contracts with his construction company pending the outcome of the federal investigation. 3 other major clients followed suit within hours. Carol called again, this time with panic evident in her voice. Emil, your father is talking about declaring bankruptcy and closing the company permanently. 37 years of work could disappear because of one family dinner conversation. I felt a moment of sympathy for my mother, but then I remembered Emma's confused question about why her family was angry about her purple ears. Mom, this isn't happening because of one conversation. This is happening because Dad chose to discriminate against disabled people for decades. But he never meant any harm, Carol protested weakly. He just ran his business the way he thought was most efficient. Sarah took the phone from me and spoke with the firm clarity of a civil rights attorney. Carol, efficiency is not a legal defense for discrimination. Excluding disabled people from employment and housing opportunities is a federal crime, regardless of the motivation. That afternoon, we met with Agent Walsh and two other federal investigators at the FBI field office in Denver. Emma stayed with Sarah's parents, who had driven up from Colorado Springs, to offer their support and care for their granddaughter during what they called important grown-up meetings. The federal investigation had uncovered a pattern of discrimination that was both broader and more systematic than we had imagined. Robert's company had not only excluded disabled employees, but had also implemented informal policies to screen disabled people out of housing projects, commercial developments, and even public buildings. We found internal company emails discussing strategies to avoid hiring problem employees with accommodation needs, Agent Walsh explained. We also found housing application records that show systematic rejection of families with disabled children through various screening mechanisms. The evidence included recorded phone conversations, where Robert instructed employees to find legal excuses to reject disabled job applicants. There were written policies requiring medical examinations that exceeded legal requirements and were designed to identify and exclude applicants with any health conditions. Most shocking of all, investigators had found evidence that Robert's company had deliberately designed some public buildings with accessibility features that met minimum legal requirements but were positioned to discourage use by disabled people. The Americans with Disabilities Act requires not just technical compliance, but genuine accessibility, Agent Walsh explained. Placing wheelchair ramps in inconvenient locations or designing accessible entrances that force disabled people to use service doors constitutes intentional discrimination. Sarah provided the federal investigators with our family's complete documentation, including the charter documents, Jessica's social media posts, and her recording of the dinner conversation. But she also shared something I hadn't known: she was preparing a comprehensive analysis of Robert's discriminatory practices from a legal perspective. I've been researching Robert's business practices for the past 6 months, Sarah admitted quietly. Ever since Emma started attending family gatherings, and I noticed patterns in how Robert responded to her accommodation needs. The revelation that Sarah had been building a case against my father for months before the family dinner confrontation was both impressive and sobering. She had recognized the systematic nature of his discrimination long before I understood what was happening. Agent Walsh reviewed Sarah's analysis with obvious admiration. "Mrs. Anderson, this is exceptional legal work. With your permission, we'd like you to serve as a consulting expert on disability rights law for this investigation." That's when Agent Walsh delivered news that transformed our family crisis into something much larger. Based on the evidence we've gathered, the Department of Justice is preparing to file criminal charges against Robert Anderson and his construction company under the Civil Rights Act. We're also coordinating with the Department of Housing and Urban Development to review every housing project his company has built or managed. The scope of the investigation was staggering. Federal authorities were examining 37 years of employment records, housing applications, subcontractor agreements, and public building projects. They were interviewing hundreds of people who had encountered Robert's company in various contexts. But the most powerful evidence came from an unexpected source. Jessica, apparently panicking about her own legal exposure, had begun cooperating with federal investigators and providing detailed information about Robert's discriminatory policies and practices. "Your sister has been very forthcoming about her father's business practices," Agent Walsh informed me carefully. "She's provided documentation of internal company policies that explicitly targeted disabled applicants for exclusion." I felt a complex mixture of emotions about Jessica's cooperation. Part of me was relieved that she was finally telling the truth about Robert's behavior. But another part of me was disgusted that it had taken the threat of criminal prosecution to motivate her honesty. The investigation also revealed the full extent of the social media harassment Emma had endured. Jessica had not only posted videos mocking Emma's hearing aids, but had also shared content with disability hate groups online, encouraging others to target families with disabled children. The cyberbullying aspects of this case could result in additional federal charges, Agent Walsh explained. Using social media to target disabled children for harassment is a serious civil rights violation. That evening, Sarah and I sat in our living room, trying to process the magnitude of what was unfolding. What had started as a family dinner confrontation about Emma's hearing aids had become a federal criminal investigation involving dozens of victims and potentially millions of dollars in penalties. Emma emerged from her bath wearing pajamas printed with purple dinosaurs, her hearing aids safely stored in their charging case for the night. She climbed onto my lap and asked the question that had been weighing on my mind all day. "Daddy, are Grandpa and Aunt Jessica going to go to jail because they were mean about my purple ears?" I struggled to find age-appropriate language to explain the situation. "Emma, when grown-ups break laws about being fair to people with differences, sometimes they do have to face consequences. But that's not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong." Emma considered this seriously before making an observation that demonstrated wisdom far beyond her years. "Maybe if Grandpa goes to jail, he'll meet other people with differences and learn how to be nicer." Sarah and I exchanged amazed looks over Emma's head. Our 7-year-old daughter had just expressed the kind of restorative justice philosophy that criminal rehabilitation programs spent years trying to develop. The next morning brought the news we had been expecting, but dreading. Robert's construction company filed for bankruptcy, laying off over 200 employees and abandoning multiple ongoing projects. The financial consequences of the federal investigation had destroyed the business empire he had spent 4 decades building. But that same morning also brought news that filled me with hope. The Colorado Disability Coalition announced the establishment of the Emma Anderson Scholarship Fund to support educational opportunities for children with hearing impairments. Donations were pouring in from across the country, inspired by Emma's courage and dignity in the face of family discrimination. Agent Walsh called with a final update that brought our journey full circle. Mr. Anderson, the federal grand jury, has voted to indict Robert Anderson on 14 counts of civil rights violations. The charges include conspiracy to discriminate, violation of federal disability rights laws, and fraudulent use of federal contract funds. The criminal trial would begin in 6 months. Jessica had agreed to testify for the prosecution in exchange for reduced charges related to her social media harassment campaign. Carol had filed for divorce and was cooperating with investigators to recover assets that could be used to compensate discrimination victims. As I hung up the phone, Emma came running into the kitchen with her school backpack ready for another day of 2nd grade. Her purple hearing aids sparkled in the morning sunlight streaming through our windows. "Daddy, my teacher says I'm going to speak at the school assembly next week about being different and brave. Will you and Mommy come watch me?" I knelt down and hugged my daughter, overwhelmed with pride and love. "We wouldn't miss it for anything, sweetheart. You're the bravest person we know." Emma giggled and adjusted her hearing aids with practiced ease. "I think being brave just means not letting mean people make you feel bad about being special." And in that moment, I realized that my 7-year-old daughter had taught me everything I needed to know about courage, dignity, and fighting for justice. 6 months later, I stood in the hallway outside Federal Courtroom Number 3 in downtown Denver, watching Emma color quietly in a coloring book while we waited for the jury's verdict in Robert Anderson's criminal trial. Sarah sat beside us, reviewing legal documents one final time, before what we hoped would be the conclusion of our long journey toward justice. The trial had lasted 3 weeks and featured testimony from over 40 witnesses, including former employees who had been denied jobs because of their disabilities, families who had been excluded from housing projects, and disabled veterans who had been unable to access the very medical facilities Robert's company had built for them. Jessica had testified for 2 full days, providing detailed accounts of Robert's discriminatory policies and her own participation in harassing Emma through social media. Her testimony was devastating to Robert's defense, but it also revealed the depth of the toxic family culture that had produced such systematic cruelty. Emma had not been required to testify, but she had attended several days of the trial, with us sitting quietly in the gallery, while witnesses shared their experiences of discrimination. Her presence reminded everyone why we were fighting, and several jurors had smiled at her encouragingly during breaks. The media attention had been intense, but overwhelmingly supportive. Emma's story had inspired thousands of families to come forward with their own experiences of discrimination, leading to investigations of discriminatory practices across multiple industries and states. The Emma Anderson Scholarship Fund had raised over $400,000, providing educational support for dozens of children with hearing impairments. Emma had personally written thank you notes to many of the donors, each one featuring drawings of children with colorful hearing aids. But the most meaningful development had come from an unexpected source. Carol, after divorcing Robert and testifying against him during the trial, had begun volunteering with the Colorado Disability Coalition and had personally apologized to Emma for her years of passive complicity in Robert's discriminatory behavior. "I was wrong to stay silent when I saw your grandfather being unfair to people," Carol had told Emma during a supervised visit at our house. "Sometimes grown-ups make bad choices, but that doesn't mean we can't learn to do better." Emma had hugged her grandmother and responded with characteristic generosity. "It's okay, Grandma. Everyone makes mistakes. What matters is being nicer next time." The courtroom doors opened and the bailiff announced that the jury had reached a verdict. We gathered our things and prepared for what we hoped would be the final chapter in our family's transformation from victims to advocates. Robert sat at the defendant's table looking far older than his 63 years. The stress of the investigation trial and financial ruin had taken a visible toll on him. He had lost weight, his hair had gone completely gray, and his once commanding presence had diminished to exhausted resignation. The jury foreman stood and announced the verdicts guilty on all 14 counts of civil rights violations. The charges carried potential sentences ranging from fines to several years in federal prison. Robert's face showed no emotion as he heard his fate pronounced by 12 citizens who had rejected his defenses and found his actions inexcusable. Judge Patricia Morrison scheduled sentencing for the following month and remanded Robert to federal custody pending a present-tensing investigation. As federal marshals led him away in handcuffs, he looked toward our section of the gallery and made eye contact with Emma. Emma waved at her grandfather with the same cheerful innocence she had shown throughout this entire ordeal. "Bye, Grandpa. I hope you feel better soon." The simple compassion in Emma's response to seeing her grandfather led away in handcuffs brought tears to my eyes. Despite everything Robert had done to exclude and demean her, Emma still wanted him to heal and find peace. Outside the courthouse, Sarah spoke to the gathered media representatives with the professional composure that had made her such an effective advocate throughout this process. "Today's verdict sends a clear message that systematic discrimination against disabled people will not be tolerated in America. But more importantly, it demonstrates that when families stand together to protect their children, justice is possible." A reporter asked Emma if she had anything to say, and she stepped forward confidently to address the cameras. "I want kids with purple ears like mine, or wheelchairs, or other special things to know that they're wonderful exactly how they are. And I want grown-ups to remember to be kind to people who are different." The reporter followed up. "Emma, are you angry at your grandfather for what happened?" Emma considered the question seriously before answering with wisdom that amazed every adult present. "I'm sad that Grandpa forgot how to be nice to people with differences. But Mommy says sadness is better than anger, because sadness means you still love someone and want them to get better." That evening, we received a call from Agent Walsh with news about the broader impact of our case. The federal investigation had expanded to include construction companies across 12 states, resulting in criminal charges against 37 business owners and over $200 million in settlements for discrimination victims. The Emma Anderson case has become a model for how families can fight back against systematic discrimination, Agent Walsh explained. "Your courage to document and report the discrimination has encouraged hundreds of other families to come forward with their own experiences." 3 months later, we attended Robert's sentencing hearing. The judge sentenced him to 18 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. As part of his probation conditions, he would be required to perform 500 hours of community service with disability advocacy organizations and undergo education about civil rights laws. But the most important condition was personal restitution to Emma. Robert would be required to write a formal apology letter acknowledging his discriminatory behavior and its impact on her, and he would fund her college education as part of his restitution to the family. Jessica received a suspended sentence in exchange for her cooperation, but she was required to perform 1,000 hours of community service, educating children about cyberbullying and disability harassment. She also had to publicly apologize to Emma and delete all social media accounts permanently. Emma's response to the sentencing demonstrated the growth and healing that had occurred throughout our journey. "I hope Grandpa learns lots of things in his new school," she said, referring to prison with characteristic childhood innocence. "Maybe he'll make friends with people who have differences and remember how to be kind." 1 year after that family dinner that changed our lives, Emma spoke at the National Disability Rights Conference in Washington, D.C. She stood confidently at the podium, her purple hearing aids gleaming under the stage lights, and shared her story with an audience of advocates, policymakers, and families from across the country. "Sometimes people forget that being different makes you special, not broken," Emma told the audience of over 2,000 people. "My purple ears help me hear all the beautiful sounds in the world, and they helped my family learn how to be brave when people were mean." She concluded her speech with a message that brought the entire audience to their feet in applause. "I learned that love is stronger than meanness, truth is stronger than secrets, and families who protect each other are stronger than families who hurt each other." Today, Emma is 8 years old and thriving in 3rd grade. Her purple hearing aids have become a symbol of pride rather than shame, and she mentors younger children who are adjusting to their own assistive devices. Sarah has been promoted to Director of Federal Compliance at the Rocky Mountain Disability Law Center, where she continues fighting for families facing discrimination. I learned that protecting those we love requires courage, to stand against even family members when they choose cruelty over compassion. Emma taught me that our perceived weaknesses often become our greatest strengths when we refuse to hide who we are. True family supports and celebrates each member's unique journey rather than demanding conformity. Standing up for justice, even at great personal cost, creates lasting positive change that extends far beyond our own lives. The story ends with our family stronger than ever, Robert slowly learning about disability rights during his incarceration, and hundreds of other families finding hope through Emma's example. What began as one family dinner's cruelty became the catalyst for protecting thousands of other families from similar discrimination, proving that our greatest challenges often lead to our most meaningful victories. Emma still asks about her grandfather sometimes, and we tell her that he's learning important lessons about treating everyone with kindness and respect. She sends him drawings and letters, always signing them, "Love your granddaughter with the beautiful purple ears." And every time she adjusts those purple hearing aids with pride and confidence, I'm reminded that the greatest gift we can give our children is not protection from the world's cruelty, but the tools and courage to transform that cruelty into compassion. Have you ever had to choose between keeping peace in your family and protecting someone you love from discrimination or bullying? How did you find the courage to do the right thing, even when it meant standing up to people who were supposed to care for you? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Thank you for listening to Emma's story and for supporting families who face discrimination because of disabilities or differences. Please like this video if it touched your heart, subscribe to hear more stories about courage and justice, and share Emma's message with anyone who needs to remember that being different makes you special, not broken. Together we can create a world where every child feels valued and protected, regardless of what makes them unique. Your support means everything to families like ours who are fighting for acceptance and equality. Until next time, remember that love is always stronger than hate, and courage is always stronger than fear.